Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Conversations on Care, our Facebook talk show, bringing together service providers, clients, caregivers to help families better understand and cope with aging parents with chronic care needs. My name is Julie Collada, and I'm the founder and president of Open Arms Solutions, a senior care agency serving the Chicagoland area, specializing in inspired holistic dementia care. It's our mission to help our families and our clients through this journey and to let you know that your loved one is living their best life possible. So if you find these dialogues helpful as always, please do give us a like and a share so that it can reach more people. Our audience is growing and growing, which is exciting to all of us. So thank you for sharing. If you have questions or topics you'd like to learn more about, write them in the comments below, and we'll be sure to get back to you with answers. With me today is Colleen Ceh Becvar, owner of Trinity Advocacy Group, LLC, to discuss senior guardianship, what it means, and who needs it. And I am happy, so happy. We've had a chance to talk a little bit yesterday and today, and really great to get to know you, Colleen. The work you do is incredibly important. I'd like to read a little bit about your background here. Okay. So Colleen is a gerontologist, owns and operates Oak Brook-based the Advocacy Group, Trinity Advocacy Group, and you have a master's of Science in Gerontology and enjoys a 26-year career of assisting vulnerable seniors, the disabled, and their families through tenacious advocacy efforts, education, and guidance.
Indeed.
So, yes. Does that sum it up pretty well?
It sums it up, yes.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
I like the tenacious part because
yes, you have to be.
When you're when you're passionate about what you do and you see you and I were just talking about this, some of the challenges that seniors and people who are disabled go through, and it's just very motivating to provide the right type of advocacy and the right type of guidance.
Absolutely.
So to start our conversation, I've gotten to know a little bit about you, but would you tell the audience a little bit about yourself, how you ended up where you are right now, what motivated you to get into and start the Trinity Group?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me, first of all.
Absolutely.
Like you, it was a no-brainer to be here with you because I know the dedication you and your team have to just going that extra mile for your clients. So it's nice to be with a like-minded individual, and an honor to be with your audience. So thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
In terms of how I started out, and the 26-year career actually started when I was in 7th grade. Although I'm not counting from 7th grade. That's not the 26 years. I've just always had this fascination with aging. And so you may remember science fair projects that you had to do in grade school.
Sure.
So mine was taste versus age. And I wanted to know at that young age, does your sense of taste change as you get older? Which of course it does, but I didn't know that in 7th grade. I've just always had this fascination, and I attribute part of that to the fact that when I was growing up, off of our front foyer, my grandmother built a 2-bedroom apartment for herself and her father. So we had 4 generations under one roof for most of my childhood.
Oh, how wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah. So I saw, yes, it was wonderful. I saw we had those dinners but it was this multiple generation conversation happening right in front of me. And so I'll never forget where I was when my grandmother was struggling with what to do to care for her father. And at that time, then we didn't call it Lewy body dementia. In hindsight, he clearly had, the hallucinations. He also had Parkinson's, and that correlation exists between those disease processes. So I saw her struggle with what to do. And something inside of me shifted. I remember it to saying, I have to do something. I have to do something for this. I can't watch her struggle like that. And I don't know, I think that at that very young age, prior to 7th grade, so younger than that, I just knew that there was, I don't know, I felt called, and I've followed that calling my whole life.
Wow.
And have made it my life's work to really serve this population in the most impactful way I know how. And so Trinity Advocacy Group is an outgrowth of that life's work. And we serve in multiple roles because we started off as care managers, sort of that person to help navigate families through trials and tribulations. Where do I go for good help? What questions do I ask? Does Medicare pay for it? All of those things that people going through those difficult decisions, they just have never had that experience yet. So we are those expert guidance, that we offer that expert guidance to them, take them through placement options, care in home, how to improve care in home and improve their lives. Just like you were saying at the opening, Julie, helping people live their best life in a system that is sometimes very fragmented. So
Yeah.
that's what we founded Trinity for. And then we would eventually start to open the roles that we play beyond care managers into very formal roles. So now we are also serving as powers of attorney for healthcare, property. We are trustees of special needs trusts and guardians.
Well, I think you feel the same way. I can tell you feel the same way, that how privileged we are to be running and leading a team in something that we're so passionate about. And while I would imagine that you would share my thoughts here, it's a privilege and it's such a responsibility.
It's an enormous responsibility.
It's an enormous responsibility. And when you have passion and you care so much, that responsibility is both your guiding light, your conscience, your a lot of different things. But I thank you for telling that story. Thank you for telling that story, because that really puts everything in perspective. So that's terrific. So let's start out with the basics, because when people say guardianship, most people, at least I find out, and not until I got into this world, is running this company, I didn't know what guardianship was. It's like you don't know till you have that experience. So what is guardianship? Let's start out this topic that way.
Thank you. Okay. So guardianship, very simply put, is a legal remedy, the legal remedy, perhaps, to someone who has nobody to speak on his or her behalf and hasn't put any kind of other protections in place. So I know we'll be talking about how to avoid guardianship, but guardianship is a court-appointed role that where the court deems a person to make the decisions, both care and financial, on behalf of a vulnerable adult. So simply put, that's what guardianship is.
Great. Okay. Thank you for that. What are some of the circumstances that trigger guardianship?
So, we were talking before about stories, and I have a lot of stories that probably does a better job of answering that question.
Right.
So situations that trigger a guardianship. When a person is unable to make his or her own decisions. And that's not my call. That's not your call. That's not even a physician's call, although that's really an important factor. That's the court's decision. The court makes a decision that a person is unable to manage his or her own affairs. They don't make that independently. They have to have a physician weigh in on that. But once that person is deemed unable to make his or her own decisions, then the court has to ask a second question, and that is, so the first one, can he or she make his or her own decision? The answer is no, based on the doctor's report, based on additional reports the court reviews. That person is adjudicated disabled, deemed disabled. And then so then that takes the court to the second question: who should be this person's guardian? Yes, they need a guardianship, but now who is that? And ideally, that person's guardian is a family member. But sometimes the reason a person goes into guardianship is that family member was serving in a decision-making role, like a power of attorney, and was abusing that role. And now we have a vulnerable older adult who has been financially exploited, physically, psychologically abused, and there is nobody else in the family who will step into that role or can step into that role. And now that person the vulnerable adult doesn't have the capacity, doesn't have the ability to appoint somebody else to fire that predatory family member. And so now they need somebody to step in and make decisions on their behalf. So, for example, I had a client who actually, she's still a client. She had been drinking, an alcoholic for many, many years. And she was found at the bottom of her stairs. Presumably she fell and was there for a number of days and was found, luckily, by her neighbor who hadn't seen her around. So when the neighbor found her, she was carted off to the emergency room. She could not talk about who she was or any of that. Turned out that she has 2 daughters. One was living in England and was her power of attorney. And they had a wonderful relationship, but the mom didn't want to take her daughter's good advice. And her daughter had been through this very similar scenario, finding mom, unresponsive. And how could she made sure the house was clean. She got everything in order for mom. And this was just maybe 18 months prior to this happening again. And the daughter just said, I love my mom. I just cannot keep doing this. And so the daughter acquiesced and said, I can't. And my mom is now, her mind is so impaired, she can't elect to appoint somebody else. Therefore, guardianship was needed to protect the interest of this, what we call the ward. The person under guardianship is called the ward.
Great. No, it's a hard story, but it's a great example of scenarios that happen and why this is so important. And, some examples are family just can't, there's just no one in the family. There may be good intention, but there's not someone really, either because they don't live locally or they don't feel they have the capacity or the knowledge or the relationship to act in that person's best interest. So thank you for sharing that story.
Sure.
So so there was a decision that guardianship was needed. What kind of legal assistance, or what is the process to petition for guardianship?
Okay, great. So once a person is clearly struggling, somebody is witnessing that, because usually, it's rare that somebody says, I need a guardian. It happens, but it's rare. So usually someone around that person's either formal or informal support team, formal being physicians, banks, somebody is noticing something's very wrong, that person's not managing life anymore, or in their informal support network. We consider family informal, actually, neighbors, those, because something's happened. And so that change is detected. And the next step is to find somebody who is willing to evaluate that person, that vulnerable person. And the court must have the report of an MD or a DO, only those two credentials. So there's plenty of neuropsychologists out there. We use them all the time. Psychologists, RNs, nurse practitioners, doesn't matter. The court requires that a physician complete a 4-question petition, a 4-question, what am I trying to say, form that asks about how do you know this patient? Are they able to make their own decisions? What is their diagnosis? And what are your placement recommendations? Which is interesting, right? But those are all the 4 questions that the physicians must answer. And per that report goes in front of a judge. Well, Colleen, how the heck do we get in front of a judge? So the way that you get in front of the judge is usually the person who has witnessed the decline of the vulnerable adult becomes what we call the petitioner. The person saying to the court, I attest to the fact that I saw this person lose capability, and Your Honor, I feel like they need protecting. Okay. So that person goes in. Now you cannot go in and petition the court without an attorney. So an attorney will be involved. So the petitioner finds an attorney and says, I really think this person needs some help.
Could that petitioner be a neighbor? Does it have to be family? Or are there any criteria that a petitioner has to meet?
Technically, no. There is no criteria for a petitioner. But I will add that if you are a petitioner, that you will have to retain counsel. And not everybody who witnesses the vulnerability of somebody else wants to put that money forth to hire an attorney, right? Because you're a neighbor, you see Mrs. Smith is starting to decline. You're worried, but you don't want to put $1,000 into, or whatever that cost is to retain an attorney. But what I will say about that, and this is an important point, I feel like, yes, as a petitioner, you might be putting that money forth, but you will be reimbursed by that vulnerable adult's funds after that person is adjudicated disabled. Okay. And that's something any attorney will tell you. So,
it's interesting that you use the term disabled.
Yes.
It's an important term.
Very important.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, one of the things that we talked about offline was, that I was recently at a Guardianship summit, and I'm so sensitive, perhaps overly so, when people start talking about older adults, that older adults need guardianship. No, older adults who are disabled need guardianship. And there is this misnomer that because you are getting older, you become vulnerable. That is more common. It is not normal aging, first of all, and a person doesn't always become disabled. And so I worked at this summit, and I was among peers. So there were a few people who get this, or I'm sorry, most people understand that. But that's why I use the term disabled. It is very intentional. And
it's important.
It's really important. Just because you're older doesn't make you vulnerable. It just doesn't.
Yeah.
And certainly does not rise to the level of what we would call a disability in many cases.
Yeah.
So the court makes the determination if a person is disabled. And so the petitioner goes in and says, Judge, I feel like this, we're going to use you as an example, Julie, if I may. Okay. And
absolutely.
I go in, I'm the petitioner. I'm worried about your functioning. Things are very worrisome. I've known you a long time, and you're disheveled, and you've never been disheveled. I see you hiring people to do work on your house, and people are coming in and out all the time, and that was never like you. You were always a very private person, and your mail is piling up. So all of these things are starting to make me very concerned. So I hire an attorney and I say, I don't want to be this person. I can't be her decision maker. I can't be Julie's decision maker. but I know there's a problem. And so you and I, and I hired an attorney, and the attorney says to me, okay, Colleen, that's fine. I'll represent you in front of the court. We'll petition the court for Julie's safety. Do you want to be the guardian? And I will say, in that scenario, assuming I'm only your neighbor, right? No, nope, I don't want to be that person. Uh-oh. Well, then who is going to be that guardian? So then what we have to do is talk to your family members. Is there anybody in your family who's willing? Do you have a power of attorney? And I see a viewer question is becoming a power of attorney necessary for legal guardianship? And the answer is no, it's absolutely not necessary. In fact, if you have a legal power of attorney, you should not need guardianship. So, but what we would do then, we would look around your family. Do you have a power of attorney in place? Because if you have a power of attorney in place, you've designated that person, then you should never need a guardian. The only time you really need a guardian is, let's change the example. Let's say, Julie, that your sister, I don't even know if you have a sister, your sister is your power of attorney, and you had a falling out 2 years after you designated her as your power of attorney. Well, she might be your designated power of attorney, but she wants nothing to do with you. She's delighted that you're starting to fail. She wants the house that you guys, whatever that is, whatever her story is. She's not going to serve in that role. She doesn't want to serve in that role. So then the question becomes, who is going to serve in that role? And so sometimes that comes to people like me at Trinity Advocacy Group, a private guardian, or a friend or a family member, another family member who would want to be that person. So the judge appoints that person as the guardian, and they are responsible for making all of your healthcare decisions and financial decisions, depending on the type of guardianship that the judge decides is most appropriate for you.
Good. And it's a great, it's a great explanation. It's a great example. And you said something I think that's really important. So many things there, but and you and I know in senior care, we do a lot of, we go to presentations. I give presentations. I'm sure you do too, to help people prevent getting in the, when my mom, and I've told this story so many times, but when my mom had a mixed dementia, vascular dementia, and Alzheimer's disease, and the vascular dementia was caused by, mini strokes. And so she went from a pretty independent functioning person, even though she had Alzheimer's, she was still in early stages. So she was really able to live by herself and just making decisions by herself, but she was a very private person, which is a very common scenario. And most people are private people.
Yes.
And, the more independent you are and more you take pride in that, the harder it becomes. And, but it was an absolute deer in the headlights for me back in 2006 when all of a sudden, and I was not in senior care industry yet. So I was just your adult daughter who had two small children and had another career, and that's a very typical scenario.
Very common. Yes.
Very common scenario. But the deer in the headlights is, oh my God, now what do we do? Because unfortunately, my family wasn't able to have the kinds of conversations that would have been so important and so helpful. So we didn't know really my mom's financial status because she was very private. We really didn't know what my mom wanted. We hadn't taken action to get power of attorney. And now we were in a really rough spot. And my brother and my sister and I only wanted the best for my mom. So that was the good news.
That is good news, because that's not always the scenario.
It's not always. No, I know. But it was very hard for us. And so, and we're almost, like, we have about 5 minutes left. So these conversations always go so quickly. And I think we've touched on some really important things. But any advice or anything that you've seen families have done, or situations where they've been able to have that conversation up front and get everything laid out beautifully. So,
Yes,
everything's
sure.
lined up.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, that is the benefit of what we call estate planning, right? That is the benefit of that. And which guides the conversation. When you're doing estate planning, you're doing in conjunction with that your powers of attorney for property, powers of attorney for healthcare. So you've got that surrogate already named in those documents. If the day comes when you cannot speak for yourself, you've designated people to do that. In
Right.
addition, when it comes to um, you know legacy planning and things like that, that's where a trust might come in, a will might come in. So there are forms available out there and methods out there to express and memorialize what your wishes are for your life. Now, the power of attorney for healthcare does an okay job when it comes to how a person's life wants to, how they want their life to be treated. If they and when they start to fail, but I think there are better tools out there for that. And that might be, one of my favorites is something called the Conversation Project. It's a completely free resource for people. And the nice thing is it takes people through, it's a workbook. It takes people through those questions that you or I might have as daughters that, parents were too private, too proud to have, or people don't want to face their mortality. That's grim. They don't want to have those conversations. But these workbooks allow that conversation, guide that conversation. And what I love about it, and you'll appreciate just based on the story about your mom, there is also a conversations workbook for people with dementia.
Hmm.
And that's really so important because oftentimes dementia is left out of these end of life conversations because we just don't know how to manage that yet well at the end of life. So that's people can definitely prevent guardianship. Now, if you are a power of attorney and your mom or dad tears up that power of attorney, they even in demented states, they have the right to terminate that power of attorney. They have the right to revoke that power of attorney. So that sometimes even the best laid plans, if your mother fired you, for example, tore up that power of attorney, you might need to go to guardianship court. And in the power of attorney documents now, there is language that says, if ever I need a guardian, I nominate my power of attorney to serve in that role.
Ah,
That was not
that's great.
always the case. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I didn't know that. I wrote down the Conversation Project workbooks because I've never heard of that either. So that's a
You're
great.
going to love it. You're going to love
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. We'll definitely do some research on that. So thank you for that. So I think it's important, and we're really running out of time, but and there's so many other questions that I want to ask you. But how do you get paid? You're private. You're a private guardianship. How does your company like yours get paid?
When it comes to guardianship, well, and all of our services really, we are paid privately. We are paid by the vulnerable persons funds. And I make that designation because a lot of times adult children or loved ones are reluctant to call Trinity Advocacy Group and others like me because they're worried that they have to pay those expenses out of their own pocket. And that's not
Right.
the case at all. So we are paid by let's keep it to guardianship specifically. Guardianship, we're paid by the ward. The vulnerable person is called the ward's estate. And estate is just a term we use in the guardianship field as money and property. Okay. So we are paid by that person's, the ward's estate, and only if the judge approves that we get paid. So we have to go into the court with a fee petition and show the court absolutely everything we've done. If we spent 10 minutes, the judge wants to know what we did for that 10 minutes. If we spent 3 hours, so we have to describe everything we've done. We go in on what's called a fee petition and say, Your Honor, this is what we've done on behalf of the ward. And this this is what it costs. And the judge will make a determination if that's fair and reasonable. And we may not get paid our full fee.
Gotcha.
But sometimes we are. So that's how we get paid.
Good. That's important for people to know. And then if there's not funds, because there are certainly impaired seniors where there are not funds, then what happens then?
Thank you. So by statute in the state of Illinois, if a person has less than $25,000 in assets, meaning their home, their savings accounts, all of that, less than $25,000 in assets, they would be under the jurisdiction of what we call the Office of the State Guardian. This whole state of Illinois, there's this repository or safety net, or whatever you want to call it. They are the Office of the State Guardian, managing hundreds of thousands of cases for people just like you described, who are very vulnerable but do not have the funds to pay a private guardian. Now, if you're over $25,000, there's also a governmental mechanism in place called the Office of the Public Guardian, and that is county specific. Usually that person is an attorney and they are court appointed as well. There aren't any guardians out there who are not court appointed if the person's over the age of 18. So the Office of the Public Guardian will take people with $25,000 or more in assets. And typically a person would have to have hundreds of thousands of dollars in assets in order to pay for private guardianship services like Trinity. Otherwise, the court wouldn't approve us, and we reasonably would not be able to take that case because we do get paid for that work. But there's many people who absolutely have those assets, and they want the work of a private guardian, somebody who is not one of hundreds of thousands of people on the Office of the State or Office of the Public Guardian. So that's how that's managed.
All right, great. Well, thank you for that explanation. And we are flat out of time.
Wow, that went so fast.
It did go so fast, and it's such an important conversation. And thank you so much for what you do for families. And you obviously have a lot of passion behind what you do, which is always inspiring to me. And for everyone who's watching, we've got Colleen's information. Best way to reach you is call you or email you, either or.
Either one of those would be wonderful. Colleen, 2 L's, 2 E's, at trinityadvocacygroup.com, or give us a call. Anybody on the team will take that call. It's 331-901-4517 is my direct line. Or you can call 331-901-5945 and reach the office at large. So it's been a pleasure. Terrific. Thank you for this.
It has been a pleasure. Really appreciate your knowledge, your passion. Thanks so much.
My pleasure.